She wants to humiliate me and my son. She doesn't know who she's messing with. Some moments don't just close a chapter, they set the whole story on fire. For me, it wasn't a screaming match or a dramatic exit. It was an envelope, cream-colored, heavy, with my name in gold calligraphy, sitting in my mailbox like a loaded gun. I didn't open it right away. I just stood there in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the marble countertop, the house so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. My heart already knew what my hands hadn't confirmed yet. This was going to hurt. My home has always been my sanctuary. After my husband, Richard, passed, I poured myself into making it a place of quiet order and understated beauty. It's not a palace, but every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall, holds a memory. The air that afternoon was filled with the scent of jasmine blooming just outside the kitchen window, a sweet perfume that usually calmed my soul. The gentle, almost imperceptible hum of the sub-zero refrigerator was the only sound, a quiet testament to a life of hard-won stability. I was standing at the marble island, swirling the ice in a tall glass of water, feeling the cool condensation on my fingers, when I heard the familiar rumble of the mail carrier's truck pulling away. I wasn't expecting anything. My business, the one I'd built from the ground up over 40 years, now mostly ran itself, and my bills were all paid online. The mail was usually just a collection of catalogs and local flyers. But as I sorted through the pile, my fingers brushed against it. The envelope was thick, heavy, made of a cardstock so rich it felt like velvet. My name, Mrs. Carol Thompson, was written across the front in shimmering gold calligraphy that seemed to mock the simplicity of my quiet afternoon. There was no return address, but I didn't need one. My heart didn't sink, it hardened into a cold, a heavy stone in my chest. I knew who it was from. With a deep breath, I slid my finger under the seal, the paper tearing with a crisp, formal sound. Inside, the invitation was even more ostentatious than its vessel. Intricate gold foil lettering proclaimed the union of Ashley Hayes and Robert Vance at a vineyard in Napa Valley that I knew cost a fortune just to walk through. Ashley, my former daughter-in-law, the woman who had systematically dismantled my son's heart and then his confidence, piece by painful piece. It wasn't the invitation itself that was the dagger. It was the two smaller items tucked inside. The first was a small, separate card, the same heavy cream stock. A handwritten note, in Ashley's perfect, looping script, was scrawled across it. "Hope you and David can make it. We've reserved a spot for you. It'll be fun to see how you're both doing." I read the words 3 times, and with each reading, a new layer of venom revealed itself. The subtext wasn't hidden, it was the entire point. "We've reserved a spot for you." Not, "We'd be honored if you'd come," but the sterile, charitable language one uses for an obligation. Like setting a place at the kids' table for a difficult relative. And that final line, "It'll be fun to see how you're both doing." The condescension was a physical thing, so thick I could almost taste its bitterness. She didn't care how we were doing. She wanted a front row seat to our presumed misery. She wanted to parade her new life, her spectacular upgrade, in front of the 2 people who represented her more humble past. The second item was the final twist of the knife. It was a single, glossy page, carefully torn from a magazine. A copy of Fortune. By the looks of it, a full-page profile of Robert Vance, Ashley's fiancé. Under the headline, "The Silicon Valley Kingmaker, Robert Vance's empire reaches 10 billion. His photo was insufferably smug, a man who looked like he'd never known a day of struggle in his life. The article gushed about his yachts, his private jet, his portfolio of tech startups that were changing the world. I dropped the page on the counter as if it were on fire. The chill from my water glass spread through my hand. but it was nothing compared to the ice forming in my veins. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't a thoughtless inclusion. This was a calculated, psychological assault. Ashley had packaged her triumph and mailed it directly to our door. She had sent us a meticulously crafted diorama of her new life, complete with a financial statement to prove its superiority. For a moment, I forgot my own anger as a wave of protective fury washed over me for my son, David. I could picture his face when he saw this. The quiet shuddering of his eyes, the forced, tight smile he would use to pretend it didn't hurt. He had loved her. He had genuinely, foolishly, and unconditionally loved her. He'd supported her through graduate school, celebrated her successes as if they were his own, and never once saw her ambition for the ruthless, devouring thing it was. When she left him, her reason was a cliché wrapped in cruelty. I just need more. David, you're wonderful, but you're... Standing there, in my silent, sun-drenched kitchen, I finally understood. Ashley wasn't just content with her new life. She needed to salt the earth of her old one. She needed witnesses to her ascension. And who better than the people she'd climbed over to get there? She was building her new castle on the rubble of my son's heart, and she wanted him to see the view from the top. The beautiful jasmine scent from the garden suddenly seemed cloying, suffocating. The quiet hum of the house felt less like peace and more like a crushing silence. I looked at the invitation lying on my cool marble island, the perfect script, the gold leaf, the billionaire's smug face. It wasn't a piece of stationery. It was a weapon. The message was clear. This wasn't an invitation to a wedding. It was an invitation to a public execution. And my son and I were the guests of honor. The 30-minute drive to my son's apartment felt like a journey across a foreign country. I left my serene, tree-lined street and merged onto the freeway, the sound of birdsong replaced by the roar of traffic. The cream-colored envelope sat on the passenger seat beside me, its gilded lettering catching the afternoon light. It felt less like a piece of mail and more like a venomous passenger, silent and watchful. I was driving into the heart of the city, into the life my son, David, was trying to rebuild, and I was carrying the one thing that could tear it all down again. David lived in a loft-style apartment in a converted warehouse district. It was the kind of place architects love: all exposed brick, polished concrete floors, and enormous steel-framed windows. But where the space should have felt airy and creative, it now felt cavernous and still. The air was thick with the faint, melancholy smells of stale coffee and the balsa wood he used for his models. A half-dozen architectural blueprints were curled on his drafting table, held down by drafting tools, but a fine layer of dust suggested they hadn't been touched in days. Life here felt paused. He opened the door before I could knock, a faint, weary smile on his face that didn't quite reach his intelligent blue eyes. My eyes. My husband's eyes. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him, and the shadow of a beard clung to his jawline, more out of neglect than style. "Mom," he said, stepping back to let me in. I was just about to make coffee. "I'd love some," I replied, my voice softer than I'd intended. My gaze swept the room, taking in the stacks of books that had yet to find a shelf and the single moving box still taped shut in the corner, a relic from a life he'd been forced to abandon a year ago. He busied himself with the espresso machine, the loud grinding of the beans, a welcome noise in the oppressive quiet. It was a dance we'd perfected over the past year, the careful questions, the cheerful deflections, the unspoken agreement not to poke at the still open wound that was Ashley. But today, I had to. I had brought the salt with me. Once the coffee was made and we were sitting at his large wooden dining table, the silence returned. I pushed my purse aside and slid the heavy, cream-colored envelope across the polished surface. It landed between us with a soft, Definitive thud. David stared at it. He didn't need to ask. He recognized the ostentatious weight of it, the ghost of Ashley's expensive taste. His shoulders, which had been attempting a posture of casual ease, slumped. He picked it up, his architect's fingers, usually so precise and steady, seeming clumsy as he pulled out the contents. He read the invitation, his expression unreadable. Then he saw the handwritten note. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Finally, his eyes fell upon the glossy magazine page, the triumphant, smiling face of Robert Vance staring up at him. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He did something far worse. He let out a quiet, hollow laugh, a sound completely devoid of humor. Then, with a gesture of profound weariness, he tossed the entire collection invitation, note, and billionaire's biography onto the stack of blueprints on his drafting table. It was trash to him now, contaminating the one thing he still had control over. Wow, he breathed out, running a hand through his hair. She never did anything by half measures. Did she? We don't have to go. David, I said quietly, my hand hovering near his on the table. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the full, crushing weight of his defeat. Go, Mom. She doesn't want us to go. Not really. This isn't a party, it's a verdict. His words, an exact echo of my own thoughts, created a sudden, chilling bond between us. He saw it just as clearly as I did. She wants us there as props, he continued, his voice low and raw. The before picture in her grand after story. The sad, discarded husband and his lonely mother. So all her new, important friends can look at us and whisper about how much better off she is. How could I have been so blind? He stood up and walked to the vast window, looking down at the street below, his back to me. I remember we were at a dinner party once, with some of her new work friends. One of them asked about my projects, and I started talking about the low-income housing initiative I was designing for the city. I was so proud of it. And I heard her. Mom. I heard her say to the woman next to her, "Oh, isn't he sweet? He's so passionate about his little projects." Little projects. In front of everyone. She called my life's work little. He turned back to me, his face a mask of old pain. It was always like that at the end. My love for hiking in our national parks was quaint. My decision not to take that high-paying corporate job to stay at a firm where I could actually design was a lack of ambition. She wasn't just falling out of love with me, she was ashamed of me. And the worst part is, I think I started to believe her. The heartbreak in the room was a tangible thing, a pressure against my chest. This was the true damage. It wasn't just the divorce, it was the slow, systematic erosion of his self-worth. Ashley hadn't just left him, she had tried to erase him, to convince him that he was nothing more than a stepping stone she had rightfully left behind. She wins, David said, his voice flat with resignation as he slumped back into his chair. She gets the billionaire, the Napa wedding, the 10-figure empire. She gets to stand up in front of the world and prove she was right to leave me. Just let her have it. I don't want to fight anymore. I listened to the rumbling of a truck from the street below, to the ticking of the clock on the wall. I saw the fine dust on his blueprints, the dust on his dreams, and in that moment, the unease and contempt I had felt earlier burned away, leaving behind something cold, hard, and absolutely clear. It was the anger of a mother who sees her child in pain and knows exactly who inflicted the wound. This was no longer about a petty social slight. This was about reclaiming my son's soul from the ghost that haunted him. I reached across the table and placed my hand firmly over his. He looked up, surprised by the strength in my grip. "No," I said, my voice quiet, but with a new, steely edge that surprised even me. No, I don't think we will. The world from the 48th floor is silent. Up here, in the penthouse that Ashley now called home, the city of Los Angeles wasn't a living, breathing entity, but a silent, glittering carpet of light. The apartment was a monument to minimalist wealth, all white leather, gleaming chrome, and vast panes of glass. There were no photographs on the sleek, black lacquer walls, no sentimental clutter on the tables. The air itself smelled new and expensive, a sterile, chemical scent of off-gassing furniture that had yet to absorb any real life. It was less a home and more a gallery, and Ashley and Robert Vance were its two most prized exhibits. Ashley stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, a tablet in her hand, scrolling through the digital seating chart for the wedding. Her reflection stared back at her, a slender, impeccably dressed woman whose smile was a carefully constructed work of art. Robert Vance, her fiancé, lounged on a sprawling white sofa behind her, swirling amber liquid in a heavy crystal glass. The ice clinked, the only sound in the vast, still room. "Everything is falling into place," Ashley said, her voice smooth and satisfied. "The caterer confirmed the Dom Perignon shipment, and the florist from Amsterdam is flying in with the orchids on Thursday." "As they should," Robert murmured without looking up, his tone bored. "For what we're paying, they should be growing new species of flowers just for you." He took a slow sip of his scotch. "Speaking of the guest list, did you ever hear back from the charity cases?" Ashley's smile tightened, but she didn't turn around. She knew exactly who he meant. It was his little pet name for David and Carol. "Patience, Robert. They only got the invitation yesterday." "You're sure they'll come?" he drawled, a flicker of cruel amusement in his eyes. "Seems like a long way to drive just for a public flogging." "Oh, they'll come," Ashley said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She finally turned, a chillingly bright glint in her eyes. "Carol is too proud to look like she's hiding. And David? Well, David will come if his mother tells him to. He always does." She walked over and sat on the edge of the sofa, placing the tablet on the glass coffee table between them. She tapped the screen, zooming in on a floor plan of the Napa reception hall. In the far back corner, almost touching the diagram for the kitchen's swinging doors, was Table 23. Two names were assigned to it, David Thompson and Carol Thompson. "Table 23, Robert read, a low chuckle rumbling in his chest, practically in the service corridor. "You're wicked, Ash. It has a perfectly good view of the band," she replied with mock innocence. "And besides, I've already spoken to the photographer. He knows to get a few candid shots of them. For posterity. I told him I want to capture the full ambiance of the evening." Robert laughed outright now, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "You're an artist, a connoisseur of cruelty." "It's not cruelty," Ashley insisted, though her smile betrayed her. "It's closure. It's narrative control." She picked up her own glass of wine from the table, her movements sharp and precise. "The real art will be in the toast." She stood up and paced back towards the window, rehearsing. "I'll thank my parents, your parents, all our wonderful friends for being here on the most important day of my life." She paused, looking at her reflection. "And then I'll raise my glass and say something like, to new beginnings, and to having the courage to close the door on chapters that no longer serve you. It's not about leaving people behind," she said, turning to face him, her eyes alight with malice. "It's about elevating yourself to where you were always meant to be." The silence that followed was thick with the poison of her words, phrased just elegantly enough to sound profound to strangers. But every syllable was a perfectly aimed dart meant for David and Carol. It was a public declaration that her life with them was a lesser chapter, A before that she had bravely overcome. Robert applauded slowly, a mocking grin spreading across his face. Bravo. It's perfect. Just enough sincerity to fool the masses. Just enough venom to hit your target. It's cute how much this still matters to you. Like you're still trying to impress the kids from your high school. The compliment was laced with condescension. And for a fleeting moment, a flash of genuine anger crossed Ashley's face. The mask slipped. This isn't about impressing anyone, Robert, she snapped, her voice hard. This is about setting the record straight. I won't have people looking at me, at us, and thinking I just got lucky. I want them to understand that this is the life I deserve. That my old life, she trailed off, waving a dismissive hand as if swatting away an unpleasant insect. That it was a mistake. A placeholder. And I want him to know it. There it was. The raw, throbbing insecurity that fueled the entire spectacle. She wasn't just marrying a rich man. She was trying to retroactively erase a past she was profoundly ashamed of. She needed to humiliate David not because she hated him, but because she hated the person she had been when she was with him. Robert, sensing he'd pushed a button, softened his tone. All right, killer. I get it. You're building your brand. He stood and walked over to her, putting an arm around her shoulder. Together, they looked out at the sprawling city below. And it's going to be a hell of a launch party. Ashley relaxed into his embrace, her cold resolve returning. She took a sip of her wine, her eyes fixed on the distant lights. They'll come, she whispered, more to herself than to him, a confident, cruel smirk playing on her lips. They're too proud not to. And that pride will be their undoing. I left David's apartment with a heart heavier than I thought possible. The sight of his defeat, the quiet resignation in his voice, had extinguished the initial fire of my anger, leaving behind a cold, desolate feeling of helplessness. I drove home in a haze, the city's vibrant life blurring past my window, unseen. Back in my quiet house, the silence I usually cherished now felt like a judgment. The beautiful rooms, the art-filled walls, the lush garden, it all seemed like a hollow shell, a gilded cage built for a life that suddenly felt profoundly under siege. For an hour, I sat in my home office, a room that had been the command center for my entire professional life. Framed awards and photographs of groundbreaking ceremonies lined the walls, testaments to a past full of battles fought and won. But staring at the cruel invitation, which I'd laid on my polished mahogany desk like a piece of damning evidence, I felt none of that old fire. I just felt tired. I considered my options. We could simply not go. Send a polite, meaningless gift from a registry and pretend the invitation never arrived. Let Ashley have her victory in a vacuum. It was the easiest path, the path of retreat. And for my son's sake, it seemed like the kindest. With a sigh, I picked up the phone and dialed. The call connected after 2 rings, and a voice as familiar as my own, yet sharper and more incisive, cut through the silence. Carol. It's been a week. I was about to send out a search party. My younger sister, Elizabeth. Lizzie, I said. A wave of relief washing over me just hearing her voice. I'm sorry. It's been complicated. Complicated is my specialty, she replied, her tone shifting from teasing to serious. She was a retired litigator, and she could hear the storm behind my quiet words. Talk to me. And so I did. I laid out the entire situation in the same calm, a methodical way I would have presented a case file. I described the envelope, the calligraphy, the sickeningly sweet note, and the masterstroke of the Fortune article. I told her about my visit to David, about the look in his eyes, the dust on his blueprints, and his final, soul-crushing words, just let her win. Elizabeth was silent throughout my entire account. She was a phenomenal listener, absorbing facts, analyzing motives, and withholding judgment until the full picture was clear. When I finished, the silence stretched for a long moment. "All right," she said finally, her voice devoid of sympathy and full of something much more useful: analysis. "So, you're planning to surrender." The words stung. "I'm not surrendering, Lizzie. I'm protecting my son." "What's the alternative? We go to this circus and let her humiliate him in person?" "Listen to me very carefully," she said, and her tone shifted into the one she used to use in courtrooms, the one that made witnesses sit up straight. "This isn't an invitation. It's a subpoena. You have been summoned to appear as a witness at your own character assassination. Ashley is the prosecutor, and her case is that you and David are miserable, irrelevant footnotes to her glorious new life. If you ignore the summons, you don't get to tell your side of the story. You are accepting her judgment by default." I sank deeper into my leather chair, the logic of her argument dismantling my emotional defenses. "So what do you suggest? We go and get put on trial?" "Exactly," she shot back. "But you go in with a better lawyer. People like Ashley, people who are this desperate to flaunt their new status, are driven by a deep, gnawing insecurity. Her biggest fear isn't that you're miserable. It's that you're not. Her entire performance is designed to convince herself she won. If you don't show up, the story she tells everyone is, 'Oh, poor David and his mother. They were just too heartbroken to come.' You'd be handing her the exact narrative she wants on a silver platter. You'd be confirming her victory." I felt a flicker of something, a tiny pilot light of the old fight in me. "But David is heartbroken, Lizzie. I can't ask him to—" "You're not asking him to pretend he's not," she interrupted gently. "You're asking him to show up and be dignified. There is nothing more infuriating to a bully than a victim who refuses to act like one. You don't have to engage. You don't have to fight. You just have to be. You have to walk into that place radiating a success and a peace that her new husband's $10 billion can't buy. Your presence, your composure, will be your testimony." I closed my eyes, picturing the scene. The thought was terrifying, but for the first time, it didn't feel impossible. I don't know if I have the energy for a fight like that. The woman who stared down a hostile board of directors in '98 because they wanted to sell her company for parts, she said, her voice laced with iron. The one who took a second mortgage on her house to make payroll during the dot-com crash? She's still in there. Carol. This is just a different kind of boardroom. The product is your family's dignity. And the stakes are infinitely higher. Her words hit their mark. She was right. I had spent a lifetime fighting for my business, for my employees, for my legacy. When had I forgotten how to fight for myself, for my own son? A slow, hot wave of resolve began to build in my chest, displacing the cold dread. "So we go," I said, the words feeling foreign and powerful on my tongue. "Yes," Elizabeth said, her voice warming now that she had her sister back. "But you don't just go. You make an entrance. You dress not to impress, but to intimidate. You carry yourself not as the grieving mother-in-law, but as the matriarch of a family that does not crumble. You need to arrive in a way that says, unbothered. You need to arrive like royalty visiting the provinces." A wild idea, an echo of a long-forgotten extravagance from a time when Richard was still alive. It began to form in my mind. It was absurd. It was theatrical. It was perfect. "Lizzie," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face for the first time that day. "I think I know just how to do that." The conversation shifted. The lament was over. The strategy session had begun. We spoke for another hour. Not about our pain, but about logistics, about timing, about attitude. When I hung up the phone, the sun had set, and the office was bathed in the soft glow of my desk lamp. I looked at the invitation, at Ashley's looping script and Robert's smug face. It no longer looked like a weapon aimed at me. It looked like a target. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the familiar, thrilling eagerness of taking aim. After the call with Elizabeth, the energy in my office had changed. The silence was no longer heavy with dread, but charged with a tense, electric potential. My own history, memorialized in the frames on the wall, seemed to look back at me with a new, challenging light. My sister's words echoed in my mind. The woman who stared down a hostile board of directors, she's still in there. Carol. Was she? For years? My life had softened. I'd stepped back from the daily combat of the business world, embracing the gentler roles of semi-retiree, gardener, and mother to an adult son. I had forgotten the taste of battle, moved by an impulse I didn't fully understand. I left the office and went to the library. Sunlight streamed through the large bay window, illuminating the rich wood of the bookshelves. On the bottom shelf, tucked behind a collection of Richard's old history tomes, were the photo albums. I pulled one out, the heavy-use, leather-bound book feeling like an artifact from another lifetime. The pages were thick and slightly yellowed, and the faint, dusty scent of old paper and fading memories filled the air as I opened it on the reading table. I turned the stiff, crinkling pages, past photos of my wedding to Richard, of a baby David taking his first steps, of family vacations and holiday dinners. And then I found it. A single photograph from 1993. It was a picture of me, 38 years old, standing in front of a modest glass storefront. My hair was bigger. My suit had shoulder pads that could stop traffic. And my smile wasn't the soft, gentle one I saw in the mirror today. It was a smile with an edge, a glint of defiance in the eyes. On the glass behind me, the simple, painted words, Thompson Innovations. The faded photograph seemed to pull me back through the years. The scent of old paper in my library, replaced by the sterile, intimidating chill of a bank. I was sitting in a ridiculously oversized leather chair that made me feel small, my portfolio clutched in my lap. It was a heavy thing, filled with market research, schematics for the data storage hardware I had designed in my garage, and a 5-year business plan I had spent 6 months perfecting. Across a vast mahogany desk sat Mr. Albright, the bank's vice president of commercial loans. He had thinning gray hair, a perfectly knotted tie, and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. He hadn't even opened the portfolio. He'd flipped through the first few pages of my executive summary, his eyes skimming the words without absorbing them. I could feel his condescension radiating across the desk, a palpable force. "Mrs. Thompson," he began, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers. "This is all very impressive. A lot of work has clearly gone into this." He slid the portfolio back across the desk towards me, a gesture of finality. "But a woman in the tech hardware space? It's a competitive world. A man's world. If we're being frank." I felt a hot flush creep up my neck, but I kept my hands perfectly still in my lap. "My design is more efficient and 20% cheaper to manufacture than anything currently on the market. The data supports it." He gave me his patronizing smile. "I'm sure it does. And it's a wonderful project. A nice little hobby for you while your husband is at work." There it was. The same dismissive, belittling poison. A nice little hobby. The same tone Ashley had used to describe my son's life's work as his little projects. The implication was identical. Your dreams are small, unserious, and certainly not worthy of a place in the real world of important men. For a heartbeat, I wanted to scream. I wanted to tip his polished desk over. I wanted to tell him that my hobby was the culmination of a decade of study and sacrifice. But I didn't. I met his dismissive gaze without flinching. The fury inside me cooled, hardening into something else, fuel. With deliberate, silent precision, I gathered my papers, closed the portfolio, and stood up. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Albright," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the inferno raging within me. I walked out of that bank with my head held high. I didn't let the tears fall until I was safely in my car, parked 2 blocks away. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure anizor, unadulterated rage. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white, and let out a single, guttural sob of frustration. Then, I took a deep, shuddering breath. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, at the fierce, determined woman staring back. The rejection hadn't broken me. It had forged me. That very afternoon, I took my plan to a group of private investors, secured my first round of funding with twice the valuation the bank would have ever given me, and never looked back. Back in my sunlit library, the memory faded, leaving a powerful echo in its wake. I traced the face of my younger self in the photograph, the woman with fire in her eyes standing in front of her tiny office. I had forgotten her. In the comfort of my success, I had allowed that fierce, battle-hardened part of myself to go dormant. I looked at Ashley's invitation, still sitting on my desk in the other room. "Mr. Albright," with his condescending smile. Ashley, with her cruel, handwritten note. They were the same person, draped in different costumes for a different decade. They were the gatekeepers, the doubters, the ones who derived their own sense of importance from making others feel small. I had spent my entire career proving people like them wrong. Why was I even considering stopping now? The fight for my son's dignity was now inextricably linked with my own lifelong battle for respect. This wasn't just a family drama anymore. It was a reckoning. Ashley hadn't just insulted a mother and a son. She had poked a sleeping dragon. I closed the photo album with a soft, decisive thump. The sound echoed in the quiet room like a gavel falling. I stood up and walked to the ornate mirror hanging in the hallway. I looked at my reflection, at the 65-year-old woman with silver streaks in her hair and fine lines around her eyes. But for the first time in a long time, I saw her the fighter, the founder, the phoenix who had risen from the ashes of a banker's dismissal. The doubt was gone. The hesitation had vanished. And in their place, a cold, familiar determination settled deep in my bones. I was no longer just a mother planning to attend a wedding. I was a warrior preparing for battle. The wedding was not a wedding. It was a theatrical production of wealth, staged at a private vineyard estate in Napa that was legendary among California's elite. The scene was breathtaking in its calculated perfection. The late afternoon sun, the kind filmmakers call the magic hour, cast a syrupy golden glow over rolling hills of meticulously tended grapevines. Guests, looking like they'd stepped out of a magazine, drifted across a vast stone terrace in shades of pastel silk and crisp linen. A string quartet played Vivaldi from a shaded alcove, their music a genteel soundtrack to the soft laughter and the delicate clinking of champagne flutes. The air was heavy and sweet with the mingled scents of thousands of white peonies, expensive perfume, and the faint, fruity aroma of aging wine from the nearby cellars. At the center of it all stood Ashley and Robert, holding court. Ashley was radiant in a couture gown that seemed spun from light itself, her smile bright, practiced, and unwavering. Robert, looking sleek and predatory in a bespoke tuxedo, kept a proprietary hand on the small of her back, a gesture of ownership. They were greeting a silver-haired U.S. senator, laughing at something he said. the picture of a newly minted power couple. "You see?" Robert murmured to Ashley as the senator moved on, his voice a low thrum of satisfaction. "Everyone who matters is here." Ashley's eyes, however, drifted towards the long, cypress-lined driveway that led up to the estate. A faint, expectant smile played on her lips. "Almost everyone," she said, her voice a purr of anticipation. The final act of her drama was about to begin, and she was ready for her curtain call. The first sign that the script was changing was not a sight, but a sound. Or rather, a lack of one. A vehicle was approaching up the long drive, but it made almost no noise. It wasn't the aggressive roar of a supercar or the silent, sterile hum of a Tesla. This was a deeper, more profound quiet, the sound of immense, effortless power. Heads began to turn. First one, then a dozen. Conversations near the edge of the terrace faltered. The first violinist in the string quartet missed a note, the brief screech of the bow drawing more attention. All eyes were drawn to the approaching car. It moved less like a vehicle and more like a land yacht, a vessel of impossible grace and gravitas. It was a vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom, a 1960 model, restored to a condition beyond perfection. Its body was a deep, fathomless midnight blue, so polished it reflected the golden sky and the towering cypress trees like a dark, flawless mirror. Chrome accents gleamed like newly minted silver, and the iconic Spirit of Ecstasy ornament on the hood seemed to carve a path through the opulent air. The car didn't belong to this world of flashy modern luxury. It was a statement from another era, a symbol of old, unshakable, generational power. The Rolls-Royce glided to a stop at the foot of the stone steps leading to the terrace. For a moment, nothing happened. The entire party seemed to be holding a collective breath. Then, a chauffeur in a simple, elegant gray uniform emerged from the driver's side. He walked with an unhurried, practiced calm to the passenger side rear door and opened it. The silence that followed was absolute. The string quartet fell completely silent. The murmur of the crowd died as if a switch had been flipped. First, a single elegant heel appeared, clad in a sapphire blue suede that perfectly matched the twilight sky. Then, I stepped out. I was not wearing the soft, floral dress of a mother-in-law. I wore a custom-tailored suit of ivory silk. Its clean, powerful lines speaking more of a boardroom than a wedding. My silver-gray hair was swept up in a classic, elegant chignon, and the simple, three-strand pearl necklace Richard had given me for our 20th anniversary was my only adornment. My expression was serene, pleasant, and utterly unbothered. As the chauffeur moved to the other side, David emerged. The transformation was breathtaking. Gone was the broken, weary man from the dusty loft. In a perfectly fitted, classic black tuxedo, he looked taller, stronger. He stood straight, his shoulders back, his jaw set not in anger, but in a calm, quiet confidence. He wasn't the discarded ex-husband, he was the handsome, mysterious stranger who had just become the most interesting man at the party. He came to stand by my side, a silent, unshakable pillar of support. We stood there for a moment, a tableau of quiet dignity at the foot of the steps. And the wave of shock that had silenced the party finally crashed upon its hosts. Ashley's face was a ruin. The bright, triumphant smile she had worn all day didn't just falter, it shattered, the pieces seeming to fall away, revealing the raw panic beneath. Her mouth opened slightly, her eyes wide with a horrified disbelief. This was not the scene she had written. The sad, little props had shown up in the wrong costumes, in the wrong vehicle, radiating the wrong energy. They hadn't come to be humiliated. They had come to haunt her perfect day. Robert's reaction was different, but no less potent. His bored amusement vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp, analytical stare. He was a man who understood the language of power, and the vintage Rolls-Royce spoke a dialect he had not anticipated. This wasn't leased luxury. This was an asset, an heirloom. This was a statement. His eyes flickered from the car to me, to David, and a look of grudging, angry respect entered his gaze. He had been tactically outmaneuvered, and he knew it. Whispers erupted through the crowd like brush fire. Who is that? Is that his mother? Good Lord. What a car. The center of gravity of the entire Fire multi-million-dollar event had irrevocably shifted. It was no longer focused on the bride and her billionaire groom on the terrace. It was focused on the mother and son who stood before them, exuding a quiet, formidable grace that made all the surrounding opulence look suddenly, desperately new. I met my son's gaze, and for the first time in over a year, I saw a spark of his old fire return. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. Together, we began our slow, deliberate ascent up the stone steps, into the heart of a party whose narrative we had just stolen completely. Our ascent up the stone steps was the longest walk of my life. Every eye was on us, 100 pairs of pupils tracking our every move. The air, which moments before had been filled with cheerful chatter, was now thick with a tense, speculative silence. The string quartet had hesitantly started playing again, but the melody felt thin and fragile, a transparent veil over the raw, unfolding drama. We didn't look at the crowd. We kept our eyes forward, our posture straight, our faces composed into masks of pleasant neutrality. We were not intruders, we were guests arriving at a party, and we would act the part. As we reached the top of the steps and set foot on the terrace, the spell of silence broke, and the whispers began a low, sibilant hiss that spread through the guests like a current. We ignored it. I saw the bar at the far end of the terrace and set our course for it. It was a neutral destination, a reason to be moving. We had made it halfway across the terrace when a flash of white moved to intercept us. It was Ashley, her couture gown swishing aggressively around her feet. The beatific smile she wore for her guests had been replaced by a tight, furious clench of her jaw. Her eyes, when she was finally close enough for me to see them clearly, were blazing with a cold, white-hot rage. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that was meant for our ears only. She gestured vaguely with her head towards the driveway, towards the magnificent, scene-stealing Rolls-Royce. "What are you trying to do?" I summoned the calmest, most serene smile I could manage. "We came to wish you well, Ashley. You invited us. Remember? Is there a problem?" My politeness was a splash of cold water on her fire, and it only made her angrier. "You know what I mean," she seethed. This whole act, the car, the clothes, you're trying to ruin my day." "On the contrary," I said, my voice still gentle. "Your wedding is beautiful. You look lovely." Every pleasant word was a shield, deflecting her fury, giving her nothing to fight against. She was seeking a screaming match, a public scene where she could play the victim. I would not give it to her. Before she could form a reply, a booming, cheerful voice cut through the tension. "Carol Thompson, I'll be damned." We all turned. It was Senator Davies, the powerful politician Ashley and Robert had been so proud to greet moments before. His face was alight with genuine pleasure and surprise. He completely bypassed Ashley, his hand extended directly to me, his eyes ignoring her as if she were a piece of decorative statuary. "Senator," I said warmly, accepting his handshake. "It's been too long. I didn't realize you knew the happy couple. Robert's father and I sit on a board together," he explained. his eyes still fixed on me. But my God, Carol, you look like you haven't aged a day since that tech conference in Geneva. I still tell people about the way you handled that German conglomerate. Legendary. He then glanced past me, down the driveway towards the car, and a nostalgic smile spread across his face. And you still have the '64 Phantom. Richard had impeccable taste. An absolute classic. The social blow was surgical in its precision. In the space of 30 seconds, the senator had publicly validated my professional legacy, referenced my long and happy marriage, and tied me to a world of old-world class and substance. Ashley, the bride, the center of the universe, was rendered utterly invisible. I saw the blood drain from her face, her forced smile becoming a grotesque rictus of humiliation. Robert had moved to her side, his expression dark and thunderous. He had just witnessed a masterclass in social power, and he was on the losing end. After another moment of pleasantries, the senator excused himself, leaving a crater of stunned silence in his wake. The whispers among the crowd were no longer just curious, they were informed. I was no longer just the ex-husband's mother. I was Carol Thompson. Now, it was David's turn. He stepped forward, his movement so calm and gentle it seemed to disarm the tense air between them. He looked directly at Ashley, and for the first time, there was no pain in his eyes. There was only a quiet, distant peace. "Ashley," he said, his voice soft but clear. "The estate is beautiful. Everything is. I wish you all the happiness you're looking for. Truly." There was no hint of sarcasm, no trace of bitterness. It was the simple, honest sentiment of a man who was finally, completely, free. Its sincerity was more devastating to her than any angry outburst could have been. It proved he had moved on. It denied her the power of his pain, the final trophy she had expected to collect today. She stared at him, speechless, her mind racing for a retort that wasn't there. She had prepared for a victim, not a man who was whole without her. We didn't stay long after that. We had done what we came to do. We didn't need to witness the cake cutting or the first dance. Our story here was finished. As we prepared to leave, I approached Ashley one last time. She was standing alone near the gift table, a solitary figure amidst her own lavish party. "Ashley," I said quietly. She looked up, her eyes full of a furious, wounded pride. I held out a small, elegantly wrapped box tied with a simple silk ribbon. A small wedding gift. Something to remember where you came from, as you start your new life. Suspicious. She took the box. Her fingers, trembling slightly with rage, fumbled with the ribbon. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a small, simple gold frame. In it was not a photo, but a check. A canceled check, dated 10 years prior, for $25,000. The memo line read, "Ashley Hayes, final student loan payment." Tucked behind it was a small, embossed card. She pulled it out and read my handwriting. A reminder that all debts are eventually paid. Live well. I watched as the meaning of the gift landed. Her face, already pale, went as white as her dress. The check was not just a reminder of her more humble origins, of a time when she had desperately needed the help of the family she now scorned. It was a final accounting. It was me, closing the ledger. It was a quiet, devastating declaration that I owed her nothing. She owed me nothing. And the transactional relationship she had fostered was, as of this moment, officially and forever concluded. Her head snapped up, her mouth open to unleash the torrent of fury she had been holding back all evening. But we were already turning away. We didn't stay to witness the explosion. Her anger was her own business now. With our backs straight and our heads held high, David and I walked through the stunned, Silent crowd. Down the stone steps, and back to the waiting Rolls-Royce. It wasn't a retreat. It was a victory lap. The heavy door of the Rolls-Royce closed with a deep, satisfying thump, and the world outside vanished. The tense music of the string quartet, the murmur of the stunned crowd, the entire multi-million-dollar spectacle, it was all sealed away, reduced to a silent, distant diorama behind the thick, insulated glass. Inside the car, the only sound was the whisper-quiet hum of the engine and the soft sigh of the old leather seats as we settled into them. The chauffeur didn't say a word, simply pulling the car into a smooth, unhurried turn. As we glided down the long, cypress-lined driveway, I glanced back through the rear window. The vineyard estate, with its brilliant lights and throngs of people, shrank with every second. It looked like a dollhouse, a perfect, glittering, and ultimately insignificant stage where a play had just concluded. I watched until it was just another sparkle in the Napa twilight, and then I turned forward, facing the dark, open road ahead. We sat in a comfortable rending, profound silence for the first few miles. There were no words that needed to be said. We had faced the dragon in its lair, not with fire and fury, but with a quiet dignity that had proven far more powerful. We had walked through the fire together and come out the other side, unburned. I could feel the tension that had been coiled in my shoulders for weeks begin to finally, blessedly, unwind. The silence was broken not by a word, but by a sound I hadn't heard in over a year. It started as a low tremor in David's chest, a shaky exhale that was half sob, half chuckle. Then, it grew. A genuine, uninhibited laugh erupted from him, echoing in the quiet cabin of the car. It wasn't a laugh of humor or of mockery. It was a laugh of pure, cathartic, liberating relief. He threw his head back against the plush leather, laughing until tears streamed from the corners of his eyes, not tears of sadness, but tears of joy. It was the sound of a cage door, rusted shut for years, finally bursting open. I watched him, a gentle, maternal smile spreading across my face as a single, happy tear of my own traced a path down my cheek. I wasn't just seeing him laugh, I was seeing him come back to life. I was seeing my son, the real David, emerge from the fog. When his laughter finally subsided into soft, contented sighs, he wiped his eyes and turned to me. "I haven't felt this light in years, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion but clear with a newfound certainty. "I know," I said softly. We didn't speak of Ashley, or Robert, or the perfect, devastating checkmate of the cancelled check. To speak of them now would be to give them space in our new, reclaimed world, and there was no room for them here. Their chapter was over. The book slammed shut. Instead, David's eyes lit up with a spark I had thought long extinguished. "You know," he began, his voice buzzing with a new energy, "that low-income housing initiative, the blueprints on my table? Driving up here, looking at the landscape, I think I figured out how to solve the zoning issue. A tiered, modular design that works with the hillside instead of fighting it. It could actually work." He was back. The passion Ashley had belittled as a little project was now alive and roaring in him, brighter than ever. He wasn't just free from her, he was free to be himself again. "That sounds brilliant, David," I said, my heart swelling with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. "You'll have to show me the new designs." "I will," he promised. A comfortable silence settled again, but this time it was filled not with relief, but with the quiet, happy hum of possibility. "I was thinking," I said, looking out at the dark silhouettes of the vineyards rushing past, "of finally taking that trip. The one your father and I always talked about. A cruise through the Norwegian fjords. I think it's time." David turned to me, his smile wide and genuine. He would have loved that. Mom, you should do it. You deserve it. In the soft glow of the car's interior lights, I reached across the space between us and took his hand. He squeezed it tightly, his hand warm and strong in mine. It was a simple gesture, but it held everything: forgiveness for the past, gratitude for the present, and a shared, unspoken promise for the future. The battle we had won tonight wasn't just against Ashley. It was for this quiet moment of connection, for the freedom to talk about our own dreams again, for the simple, priceless feeling of being a family, whole and unbroken. The Rolls-Royce moved effortlessly through the darkness, its powerful headlights cutting a bright, unwavering path forward. For the first time in a long time, the road ahead wasn't something to be feared or endured. It was an open invitation, and we were finally free to take it. Warm regards, and I hope everyone is staying safe and strong.